talk about fiscal policy, which is the elephant in the room that Paulo mentioned. 3 topics. 1, the mathematics of sustainability. 2, optimal size of the government. 3, the social security reform. The mathematics of the sustainability. Sustainability, the fiscal sustainability, you get some money from taxes, you spend money, and then you cannot spend more than what you get, otherwise that explodes. You can do some math, and I can prove 2 theorems using some mild hypotheses. First theorem is social security reform is a necessary condition for sustainability. Second theorem is social security reform plus the expenditure ceiling is a sufficient condition for sustainability. The first one is saying, unless you do social security reform, things explode. Why you spend with social security something like 13% of GDP, and because of the aging of population, you're going to be spending more and more. This amount that you spend doubles in 30 years. So you're going to spend all the possible money in social security, even if you cut on the rest, it's not going to be doable. The second theorem says, once you do the social security reform, because you have the expenditure ceiling approved, remember there's some discussions in the end of last year, oh, should we keep the ceiling or not? But the ceiling is there, nobody's talking about that anymore, and it was a decision to keep the expenditure ceiling in place. Once you have that thing in place, things are going to work okay. Implicit in this, there is an issue here that you should pay attention to. One thing is to do reforms in addition to the social security reform to make the ceiling binding. You can do things like change the minimum wage rule, you can hold constant civil servants' wage, you can cut subsidies. Other alternative is not to do anything. The ceiling, the expenditure ceiling that is in the Constitution has some automatic triggers. And once you cross, you breach that ceiling, it triggers stuff like changing the minimum wage rule, holding constant the civil servant's wage, and cutting subsidies. That is the same stuff that I just mentioned. And then you cross the ceiling, you blame the previous administration, and you're going to be okay. So it might be boring for non-economists to only listen about social security, oh, you only talk about social security, talk about something else more fun. But that's the thing, right? The 2 theorems saying, do social security reform, and then you can start talking about other stuff. If you don't do the social security reform, you're dead. That's the deal. Second issue, on the optimal size of the government. There was a change in this new government talking about small government, right? You see, Paulo Guedes and Bolsonaro, we're going to shrink government. That's the first in Brazil. And what is the optimal size of the government? As an economist, there's no right and wrong answer. What we know is that there's a trade-off. It's called sometimes the big trade-off of fiscal policy, of finance, of public finance. There is the trade-off between equality and efficiency. The idea is that you might have a big government to redistribute money to make society more equal. But when you do that by taxing and by trying to redistribute because of administrative costs, because of changing the incentives of people, you lose something. It's like a bucket with a hole. So you're going to try to make society more equal. You lower GDP per capita. The average guy gets worse. And what do? You prefer a society richer or more equal? It's up to you. You can have Larry Summers, Paul Krugman say we want big government and more equal. And you can have Barrow and Rogoff say no, I want a small government. So even if you go to the same economic department, you're going to have people disagreeing. It's a good disagreement, it's a fair, it's a good discussion to have. And it's the first time we're going to have in Brazil. In Brazil, most of the times we discuss economics, not the big and small government, but voodoo economics, right? We discuss if it's possible to eat the cake, and the cake is going to get bigger as far if you eat more, some stuff crazy like that. So now we're going to discuss good stuff. And you should be thinking, okay, now you have a government that wants Bolsonaro, but a small government. What's going to happen to inequality? What is the deal here? And my input in that is that Brazil is a weird place. That there are some low-hanging fruits. Some redistribution policies in Brazil are so bad that they don't redistribute. And you can go and reallocate this money to something more useful, like the Bolsa Família, the family scholarship, that is very good to redistribute. So besides Bolsa Família, education and health, all the other parts of the government, like 80% of what the government spends, is worse than the helicopter drop of money in terms of redistribution. So you like to go around and throw the money, rich people, poor people, they all get the same amount of money, right? You just go over, and the policies are worse than that. They're less focused on that. So if you go and reallocate the policies of the government, I'm not saying to create something new. So now I'm going to spend less on Social Security, more in Bolsa Família. Play here. You can get both. You can get a richer economy, higher GDP per capita, and with the same or even better inequality between people. So you can, the calculation they've done there in the past in the finance ministry, we could shrink government expenditure from 20%, that's the federal government, to 9%, keep the same inequality effect, and have an increase in GDP about 10%. So there's a margin there, and that's what we should be looking for, how they're going to reallocate so that the government can be smaller and you have the same equality of the society. Third topic, Social Security reform. What should we expect them to announce? It's a pity that the Minister of Finance talked to press yesterday night and stole my thunder. I thought I was going to say new things here. So what should we expect? Some Social Security reform that saves more than 1 trillion in 10 years. That was coming. What else in there? Some fully funded scheme, the capitalization scheme. Well, I know that fully funded is great, but there's a problem of cash flow. You stop collecting taxes for the people that just got into the labor force. So it's going to have a problem of cash flow. But there's a trick. You can do the fully funded scheme only for later generations. For example, for people they're born after 2014. And then you only have this cash flow problem 20 years from now, and then you don't have to worry about too much. What else should you expect to have there? I think militaries are going to be in the reform, even though the newspapers are saying that they are not, but then the newspapers are wrong. I'm right. So you're going to have militaries in. What else should I expect? Maybe they're not going to specify the transition rule fully. So instead of saying, okay, people can only retire when they are 65, there's a transition. So it's 65 in 20 years. They may go and say, no, people can retire when they're 60 years old in 8 years from now. And then the next president decides after that. It's the same, but it's an easier way to sell, right? You only talk about 8 years from now rather than talking about 15 years from now. What else should you expect? And that's my main concern. I think they're going to try to break the link between minimum benefits and the minimum wage. Saying stuff like, okay, minimum benefit is 70% of the minimum wage. I think it's wonderful, but it's going to be tough to pass that in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court might challenge that. So my take, and I'm stealing now Chris' thunder, I'm going to say what is going to be the end game. Rather than 1 trillion and something that's going to be the initial reform, they're going to drop this, it's going to be diluted in the process. And when we guess the dilution, I have to consider, first, they have a great negotiator, Rogério Marinho. This is a guy in the new team that is awesome. That's the best guy, in my opinion, of the new team, the new economic team. A big gain in the economic team. The big loss in the economic team is that I'm not there. That's my mom's opinion. Second, they don't have the same carrots and sticks to negotiate. The deal before was to give jobs in the ministries, to choose the parliamentary amendments, and from that you get the votes. They decided not to do it. They decided to clean it up. It's great, but they have less bargaining margin. Third, you have a tweeter now, right? You have a president that sends tweets, and might say, okay, the Congress is not doing what I want. I have this name here of this congressman who's that might be powerful. That's a new thing in Brazil. My guess is that they're going to end up with something like a 700 billion reform that is better than ours. And in the sense, I'm very optimistic about Brazil, at least in the short term.